Somebody cured the plague with music. Somebody else caused a war with a bucket, and one guy survived 2 atomic bombs. These aren't legends. They're receipts from history itself. Oh, and while you're here, I noticed you're watching but not subscribing. It takes one click and it keeps these wild stories alive because, trust me, researching them almost melted my brain. Number 1. When the first atomic bomb hit Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was just 3 kilometers from ground zero. The blast threw him through the air, burning his face and hands. He somehow made it out of the city, bandaged his wounds, and boarded a train home to Nagasaki. But 3 days later, he saw another blinding flash. The second bomb detonated right over his office. The shockwave tore through the building, yet again he survived, this time crawling out of the rubble to find a world covered in ash. Doctors said the radiation would kill him within weeks, but he lived another 60 years, carrying 2 atomic scars that told the story of how one man survived both ends of the world. Number 2. Violet Jessup had worked on ships her entire life, but luck always seemed to follow her through disaster. She was on the Titanic when it hit the iceberg, helping passengers to lifeboats as the ship went under. She was rescued, bruised and freezing, but alive. 4 years later, she boarded the Britannic, the Titanic's sister ship, now serving as a hospital vessel. Then in the Aegean Sea, it struck a mine. The explosion tore the hull open, pulling it under in less than an hour. Violet jumped, but the suction dragged her into the propellers, fracturing her skull. She surfaced, coughing water, and somehow made it back to shore. 2 identical tragedies, and she lived through both. Number 3. In 1632, Samurai Tori Suneman was sentenced to beheading for treason. Kneeling before the executioner, his neck was struck clean through, and yet his body didn't fall. Witnesses said he stood there for several seconds, blinking before collapsing. The blade hadn't fully severed his spine, and his nerves kept firing, sending signals through the muscles that refused to die. Stories of the beheaded who walked spread across Japan, blurring the line between fact and legend. But medical studies later confirmed the body can twitch, move, even stand for moments after decapitation. For a few impossible seconds, Suneman truly survived the impossible, standing between life and death. Number 4. Park Ranger Roy Sullivan wasn't just unlucky. He was struck by lightning 7 times and lived through everyone. The first strike burned a hole in his hat and singed his eyebrows. The second knocked him unconscious. By the 4th, he started carrying a bucket of water in his truck just in case. His hair was burned, his nails split, his boots melted, but somehow he always walked away. Statistically, the odds of that happening are beyond calculation, more likely than winning the lottery twice in a row. He joked that storms followed him, but deep down, he believed it. The 7th strike hit him standing in his backyard. He survived that too, but the fear never left him. Number 5. In 1964, escape artist and convict Richard McNair decided the only way out of prison was to mail himself out. He built a wooden box inside the prison workshop, just big enough for his body, and packed himself with breathing holes, a flashlight, and a small water bottle. The box was loaded with mail bags and sealed into a shipping truck. For 26 hours he lay silent, counting every bump of the road. When the delivery truck finally stopped, he waited until it was dark, then kicked his way out. He climbed from the crate into open air, free, filthy, and unnoticed. For a few days he vanished completely, until the FBI found him again, proving he could escape a cell, but not the story that followed him. Number 6. In 1961, a Soviet doctor named Leonid Rogozov was stationed in Antarctica when he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. It grew worse by the hour until he knew what it was: appendicitis. With no surgeon for thousands of miles, he had one option: operate on himself. He sterilized his instruments, propped up a mirror, and injected a local anesthetic. Working by feel, he sliced into his own stomach, found the swollen appendix, and removed it. He nearly passed out twice, but managed to stitch himself up before collapsing. 2 weeks later, he was walking again, the only man in history to perform surgery on himself and survive on the coldest continent on Earth. Number 7. But Leonid wasn't the first to turn the scalpel inward. Decades earlier, American surgeon Evan O'Neill Kane had done the same thing, not once but twice. He believed most surgeries could be done under local anesthesia, So to prove it, he removed his own appendix while awake. With nurses watching, he made the incision, tied off the artery, and cut the organ free, all while chatting calmly. Years later, he repeated the experiment by fixing his own hernia. He called it scientific curiosity. Others called it madness. But his work changed how anesthesia was used, showing just how far a doctor would go to test his own theories. Number 8. Not every surgeon's story ends in triumph. Robert Liston, a 19th century Scottish surgeon, was known as the fastest knife in London. In the days before anesthesia, speed meant survival. He could amputate a leg in under 30 seconds, but haste had its cost. In one infamous surgery, he accidentally sliced off his assistant's fingers while cutting the patient's leg, then nicked a spectator's coat, who later died of shock. The patient and assistant died of infection. 3 deaths from one operation, a 300% mortality rate that made medical history. Yet Liston's speed and precision still paved the way for safer surgeries once anesthesia arrived, proving how progress often cuts both ways. Number 9. That same operation became a legend. Witnesses said Liston's knife flashed so fast it blurred. The crowd pressed close to watch, unaware of the danger. As he swung the blade, he shouted, "Time me, gentlemen!" And in his frenzy, cut through everything in reach: patient, assistant, and observer. The amputation was technically a success, but infection claimed them all within days. It became one of the most famous blunders in surgical history, a grim reminder that in medicine, precision mattered more than pride. And for Liston, the fastest hands in the world became a cautionary tale for generations of surgeons to come. Number 10. Then came Vladimir Demikhov, the Soviet scientist who blurred the boundary between science and nightmare. In the 1950s, he surgically attached the head and front legs of a small dog onto the neck of a larger one, creating a 2-headed creature that could blink, lap water, and even move both mouths. The hybrid survived for days before its body rejected the transplant. It shocked the world, but Demikhov insisted it was research toward heart and organ transplants. His gruesome experiments inspired future breakthroughs in transplant surgery, even influencing the team that performed the first human heart transplant. It was brutal, controversial, and yet impossible to ignore. Number 11. In the 1970s, Italian neurosurgeon Sergio Canavero began chasing one of medicine's most disturbing dreams: human head transplantation. Inspired by earlier animal experiments, he believed the brain could be rebooted on a new body if the spinal cord was severed cleanly and reattached with a chemical he called PEG. In 2017, he claimed success on human cadavers, even planning a live surgery using a volunteer. But the medical world pushed back. Ethics, rejection, and the sheer complexity made it almost impossible. Still, his research reignited debate about where life truly begins, whether in the mind or the body that carries it. Number 12. That same obsession with human limits drove Alexander Bogdanov, a Russian scientist in the early 1900s, to test blood transfusions in ways no one dared. He believed exchanging blood between people could extend life, even enhance intelligence. So he tried it on himself, repeatedly. At one point, he used the blood of a young student, claiming he felt rejuvenated. But his final experiment used horse blood, and the reaction was immediate: fever, nausea, then collapse. The body rejected it violently, and Bogdanov died. Yet his reckless pursuit helped lay the groundwork for safe transfusion science, built on the risks he refused to avoid. Number 13. In 2012, Felix Baumgartner stepped out of a capsule hovering 24 miles above Earth's surface. The moment he jumped, he broke the sound barrier, falling faster than any human in history. His body spun uncontrollably, his vision blurred, and his blood could have boiled if his suit failed. But somehow he stabilized, slicing through the atmosphere for 4 minutes before his parachute opened. He landed safely in the desert, his body shaking but alive. The world watched in awe as a man literally fell from space and walked away, proving that human endurance can outrun even gravity itself. Number 14. Over a century earlier, another man took a similar leap of faith, straight into Niagara Falls. In 1901, schoolteacher Annie Edson Taylor climbed into a wooden barrel padded with pillows, sealed it tight, and had it rolled into the river. The barrel plunged over the 160-foot drop, smashing through mist and rock below. Minutes later, rescuers found it bobbing in the water. When they pried it open, Annie was bruised but alive, the first person ever to survive the falls. She expected fame and fortune, but found only debt. The stunt was legendary, but the world moved on, leaving her name behind with the rushing water. Number 15. In 1983, Israeli pilot Zevi Nadivi's fighter jet collided mid-air with another plane during a training exercise. The impact ripped off the entire right wing and the jet began to spiral violently. Most pilots would eject, but Zevi fought to control the spin. He pushed the throttle full forward, using the engine's thrust and remaining wing to balance the aircraft. Against all odds, the jet stabilized. He guided it back toward base and somehow landed it safely on one wing. Engineers later said it was physically impossible. Number 16. In 1938, Douglas Corrigan took off from New York in his small, worn-down plane, claiming he was flying to California. But 28 hours later, he landed in Ireland. The press dubbed him Wrong Way Corrigan. He insisted it was a navigational error, blaming faulty compasses and poor weather, but few believed him. Corrigan had been denied permission to fly transatlantic, and this mistake was his quiet act of rebellion. He became a national hero overnight, a man who defied bureaucracy by simply pretending he didn't mean to. Number 17. Then there was Lieutenant Charles Chuck Brown in World War I, who took disorientation to a new level. Lost over Europe after a storm knocked out his instruments, he descended through the clouds looking for a landmark. Instead, he spotted a farmhouse, landed in a nearby field, and walked up to the door, just to ask for directions. The stunned villagers pointed him toward friendly territory and he took off again, waving as if nothing was strange about it. It was one of the most casual acts of survival in wartime aviation, navigating a battlefield the same way someone might find a lost road. Number 18. But no pilot's detour shocked the world like Matthias Rust's. In 1987, the 19-year-old German amateur pilot flew a small Cessna straight into Soviet airspace, dodging radar, evading interceptors, and landing right in Moscow's Red Square. He stepped out smiling as onlookers gathered around him in disbelief. His goal wasn't espionage or fame. He said he wanted to build peace between East and West. The stunt humiliated the Soviet military and led to massive leadership shakeups. Rust spent over a year in prison, but his flight became a strange symbol of defiance, a teenager proving that even the Iron Curtain had cracks. Number 19. In 1987, another pilot, Keith Gallagher, had a different mission: love. He stole a small plane from his employer to impress a woman he'd just met, telling her he'd fly to see her that night. But as he raced toward her city, he ran out of fuel mid-air and crash-landed in a field. He survived with only minor injuries but was promptly arrested. When asked why, he said simply, "I thought she'd be impressed." The stunt failed miserably, but it became one of aviation's most reckless love stories, proving that adrenaline and affection are a dangerous mix at any altitude. Number 20. And then there was Martin J. McNally, a small-time criminal who in 1972 hijacked a commercial flight, demanding $500,000 in parachutes. But his plan went wrong fast. The money was thrown from the plane too soon, scattering in the wind. So McNally did something unheard of. He hijacked another plane days later, this time using the same weapon and almost the same script. The FBI caught him before takeoff, ending one of the strangest déjà vu crimes in aviation. He failed twice, but somehow became a legend of persistence, a man who literally hijacked his own idea. Number 21. In 1944, during World War II, a U.S. pilot returning from a bombing mission over Germany accidentally released his payload too early, right over his own airbase in Belgium. The bombs tore through the runway and barracks, setting fuel depots ablaze. It wasn't sabotage, just a malfunction in the bomb bay doors caused by frost and turbulence. By the time the smoke cleared, several aircraft were destroyed, and dozens injured, all from friendly fire. The pilot survived but lived with the weight of bombing his own men, a grim reminder that in war, even the smallest mistake can explode into tragedy. Number 22. But explosions weren't the only disasters that turned cities into nightmares. In 1919, Boston was drowned by molasses. A massive storage tank burst without warning, sending a wave of hot syrup racing through the streets at nearly 35 miles per hour. It crushed buildings, snapped rail cars, and trapped people in sticky darkness. Horses sank instantly, and rescuers had to wade knee-deep through sugar to reach survivors. 21 people died in what became known as the Great Molasses Flood. Investigators found that the tank had been poorly built and never tested, proof that even something as sweet as molasses can kill when ignored long enough. Number 23. Hundreds of miles away, another town burned, but it never stopped. In 1962, a coal seam under Centralia, Pennsylvania, caught fire from a landfill spark. The flames spread underground, feeding on miles of coal veins. The ground began to crack open, releasing heat and smoke that made the town unlivable. Houses sank, streets split, and the population fled. Yet the fire still burns today, over 60 years later, deep beneath the ghost town that used to stand there. Scientists estimate it could keep burning for another 2 centuries, a quiet inferno that refuses to die. Number 24. But not all fires begin underground. In 1871, the small Wisconsin town of Peshtigo burned completely to the ground after sparks from a cheese factory ignited hay bales nearby. The flames leapt through the wooden buildings and spread faster than anyone could react. Within hours, the entire town was gone, hundreds dead, including the factory workers who started it all. The tragedy was overshadowed by the Great Chicago Fire that happened the same night, but Peshtigo's blaze was far deadlier. A single wheel of cheese had triggered the most destructive fire in U.S. history. Number 25. And in 1814, London faced its own bizarre flood, not of water, but beer. A giant vat at the Moo Brewery ruptured, releasing over 300,000 gallons of porter that tore through the streets like a brown tsunami. It smashed walls, swept away carts, and flooded basements, drowning several residents. Crowds gathered to scoop beer into buckets, turning disaster into a strange celebration, until the smell of yeast and death lingered for days. The company never recovered, but the tale of London's beer flood became one of history's strangest accidents. A city literally washed in ale. Number 26. In 536 AD, the world was plunged into darkness. For 18 months, the sun dimmed to a pale glow, casting an eerie twilight even at noon. Crops failed, snow fell in summer, and famine swept across continents. Historians once thought it was myth, but modern research traced it to a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, that sent ash and sulfur into the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight worldwide. Temperatures dropped by nearly 3 degrees Celsius, and the following decade became the coldest in 2,000 years. Empires faltered, disease spread, and civilizations that had stood for centuries suddenly collapsed. It was, by every account, the worst year to be alive. The darkness eventually lifted, but the scars it left reshaped history, marking the start of the medieval world as ancient societies faded under an ash-filled sky. Number 27. In 1812, Napoleon's Grand Army marched toward Russia, 600,000 men strong. But as winter closed in, they faced an enemy far deadlier than gunfire: the cold. Their bright cotton uniforms and thin boots offered no protection against temperatures that dropped below 30 degrees C. Muskets froze, food turned to ice, and soldiers collapsed in the snow, dying faster than they could retreat. When they finally stumbled out of Russia, fewer than 100,000 remained. The army had essentially worn itself to death. Historians say it wasn't bullets or bayonets that destroyed Napoleon's empire, but cloth, uniforms designed for summer parades, not Siberian hell. Even his greatest strategic mind couldn't outthink the weather, and that single miscalculation changed the balance of Europe forever. Number 28. On August 27, 1896, Britain and Zanzibar fought the shortest war in history, lasting only 38 minutes. It began when the Sultan of Zanzibar refused to step down after Britain demanded his abdication. When diplomacy failed, British warships opened fire on the royal palace, obliterating it within minutes. Over 500 defenders were killed, while only one British sailor was injured. The Sultan's flag was torn down and a new ruler, approved by London, was installed before the hour was over. Civilians who witnessed it said the war was over before they even understood it had begun. The conflict showed just how wide the gap of power was between colonial empires and the nations caught in their shadow, a battle that ended faster than it took to make breakfast. Number 29. In 1325, two Italian city-states, Modena and Bologna, went to war over a wooden bucket. Modenese soldiers had stolen it from a Bolognese well as a joke, but the insult sparked outrage. Bologna assembled 30,000 troops to retrieve their bucket and reclaim their pride. The armies clashed in what became known as the War of the Oaken Bucket. Modena's smaller but better trained force crushed their enemies, capturing thousands. When it was over, they kept the bucket as a trophy, and it's still on display in Modena today. What began as a prank ended in bloodshed, reminding the world that even the smallest symbols of pride can send nations to war. Number 30. 3 centuries later, another ridiculous war erupted, this time between the United States and Britain. In 1859, an American farmer shot a pig that was eating his potatoes on San Juan Island, territory both nations claimed. The British demanded compensation, the Americans refused, and both sides sent warships to the coast, cannons ready. For weeks, soldiers stood face to face, waiting for orders that never came. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, and the pig war ended without a single human casualty. Only the pig had died. Years later, diplomats joked that it was the most civilized conflict in history. 2 empires almost went to war over a potato thief on 4 legs. Number 31. In 1739, Britain and Spain plunged into conflict over one severed ear. British Captain Robert Jenkins had been stopped by Spanish coast guards, who accused him of smuggling. When he protested, a Spanish officer drew his sword and sliced off Jenkins's ear, telling him to deliver it to his king as a warning. Years later, Jenkins did exactly that, bringing the shriveled ear before the British Parliament. The sight enraged politicians and the public alike, sparking the War of Jenkins' Ear. What followed was 8 years of brutal naval battles across the Caribbean and the Americas. Thousands died and trade routes were shattered, all because one man's mutilation became a symbol of national pride. Number 32. In 1838, Mexico and France went to war, not over territory or treasure but a flag. It began when a French pastry chef in Mexico City demanded compensation after his shop was looted during civil unrest. When the Mexican government refused, France sent warships demanding payment and respect for its flag. The standoff escalated until French cannons bombarded the city, beginning what became known as the Pastry War. After months of fighting, Mexico finally agreed to pay 600,000 pesos, an absurdly high sum for a bakery dispute. The war might have started over a flag and a pastry shop, but it ended as another reminder that national pride can be far more combustible than gunpowder. Number 33. Decades later, another flag nearly caused war again, this time between the United States and Britain over the San Juan Islands in 1859. It all began when American farmer Lyman Cutler shot a British-owned pig that was eating his potatoes. British authorities threatened arrest. American troops landed in response, and both nations raised their flags over the disputed land. For weeks, warships lined the coast, soldiers dug trenches, and tension built. Yet, despite the standoff, no shots were fired. The dispute was finally settled peacefully, with the island eventually going to the U.S. The Pig War, as it became known, proved that diplomacy could sometimes win where muskets failed, and that a single hungry animal could nearly rewrite a border. Number 34. In 1914, during the Christmas truce of World War I, something remarkable happened. The guns fell silent across the Western Front, and soldiers from both sides cautiously emerged from their trenches. They shook hands, exchanged cigarettes, and then someone kicked a soccer ball into the open field. What followed was an impromptu game between enemies, German and British troops laughing, cheering, and forgetting for a few hours that they were at war. When orders came to resume fighting, Many soldiers couldn't bring themselves to shoot at the men they just played with. The war continued for 4 more years, but that single day stood as a fragile moment of humanity amid chaos. A reminder that even in the darkest times, people still looked for connection instead of conflict. Number 35. Hiroo Onoda was trained to never surrender. Sent to a remote Philippine island during World War II, he was ordered to fight until told otherwise, but communication never came. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Onoda refused to believe it. For nearly 30 years he lived alone in the jungle, raiding villages and evading soldiers, convinced the war was still going. Leaflets and search parties tried to reach him, but he dismissed them as enemy propaganda. It wasn't until 1974 that his former commander, long retired, was flown in to personally relieve him of duty. Onoda finally laid down his rifle, saluted, and wept. He had fought 3 decades alone, unaware the world had already moved on. Number 36. In 105 BC, during the Battle of Arausio, the Roman army faced one of its greatest humiliations, and it began with something as simple as thirst. 2 Roman commanders, Consul Gnaeus Mallius Maximus and Proconsul Quintus Servilius Scipio, refused to cooperate, each too proud to take orders from the other. When word came that the Cimbri and Teutones tribes were approaching, they argued over strategy instead of uniting their troops. Scipio marched his men ahead to claim the best position. Unfortunately, it was a barren stretch of land with no access to water. Under the blazing southern sun, his soldiers went days without drinking, their throats cracking and shields heating like ovens. By the time the enemy arrived, the Romans were already weak and dehydrated. The Cimbri swept through them like wildfire. Tens of thousands were cut down as they fled toward the river, too desperate to fight. What was meant to be an easy victory became one of the worst defeats in Roman history. An entire army destroyed because 2 men's pride outweighed common sense. The dry dust of Arausio buried not only soldiers, but Rome's illusion of invincibility, teaching the empire that even the mightiest legions fall when they forget the basics of survival. Number 37. Shoichi Yokoi had been a tailor before the war, but in 1944 he was sent to Guam to serve in the Japanese army. When American troops took the island, he fled into the jungle rather than surrender. For the next 28 years, he lived in silence beneath the trees, digging a small underground shelter reinforced with bamboo and hidden by leaves. He hunted at night, catching shrimp with handmade nets, weaving clothing from palm fibers, and boiling roots in rainwater. Every radio broadcast or leaflet he found claiming Japan had surrendered, he dismissed as enemy lies. When local hunters discovered him in 1972, he resisted capture, thinking the war still raged. Returned to Japan, he bowed deeply and said, "It is with much embarrassment that I return alive." For almost 3 decades, he had fought a war that had ended before he even began hiding. His loyalty frozen in time while the world outside moved on. Number 38. Teruo Nakamura was another ghost of a vanished empire. Born in Taiwan when it was under Japanese rule, he served with the Imperial Army on the Indonesian island of Morotai. When Japan surrendered in 1945, communication never reached his isolated post. He built a small hut in the jungle, grew vegetables and avoided villages, convinced enemy patrols still searched for him. For nearly 30 years he lived off the land, repairing his rusted rifle and keeping a log of imaginary orders. In 1974, construction workers spotted smoke from his camp and alerted authorities. Soldiers approached cautiously. Nakamura aimed his weapon but hesitated. When told Japan had surrendered 3 decades earlier, he stared in disbelief. Repatriated at last, he discovered his homeland no longer existed. Taiwan was independent, Japan transformed. For him, the war had outlasted nations themselves, ending only when history caught up to him. Number 39. At Stalingrad in 1942, Soviet infantryman Yakov Pavlov was buried alive when an artillery shell collapsed the upper floors of the building he defended. Surrounded by rubble and corpses, he heard German troops searching for survivors. Realizing any movement meant execution, he froze completely, slowing his breath until it matched the dead around him. For more than 10 hours he lay motionless, dust choking his lungs. flies crawling across his skin, footsteps scraping nearby. The soldiers moved on, assuming everyone inside was gone. When night fell, Pavlov clawed his way out, half-conscious, and crawled through ruins back to Soviet lines. His comrades thought he was a ghost. He had survived not by fighting, but by surrendering to stillness, becoming indistinguishable from the dead until life quietly returned to him. In a battle that claimed nearly 2 million lives, he lived because he refused to blink. Number 40. In April 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Germany, British troops entered Hitler's Munich apartment. The rooms were abandoned in haste, papers scattered, dishes half-washed, relics of a life that had ruled millions. Among the soldiers was Sergeant Reg Edwards, who searched the bedroom and found a small velvet case on the dresser. Inside lay a silver-handled mustache brush, monogrammed AH. He pocketed it as a keepsake, unaware it would become one of the strangest trophies of the war. Later, when he showed it to fellow soldiers, they laughed in disbelief. The brush that maintained the most infamous mustache in history now sat in a soldier's kit bag. Edwards kept it for years, a reminder that even the most terrifying figures are reduced to ordinary possessions when their power collapses. The fall of a dictator captured not in gold or medals, but in a single, absurd grooming tool. Number 41. During the brutal Finnish-Soviet Winter War of 1940, soldier Imo Koivunen found himself separated from his unit deep in the Arctic wilderness. Pursued by enemy ski patrols, exhausted and freezing, he reached into his pack for stimulant tablets meant to keep soldiers alert. His hands shook, and instead of taking one, he swallowed the entire supply, 30 methamphetamine pills at once. Within minutes, his heart raced violently and reality fractured. He skied nonstop for days through snowstorms, hallucinating shapes in the trees, convinced he was still fighting. At one point, he encountered a moose, climbed onto its back and rode it through the forest before blacking out. When rescuers found him 2 weeks later, he had traveled nearly 250 miles, frostbitten and delirious, but alive. Doctors called his survival a medical impossibility. Koivunen simply remembered it as a blur of white light and noise, proof that desperation, luck, and a dangerous rush of chemistry can sometimes outpace death itself. Number 42. In 2007, a Swiss village woke up to the sound of tanks rumbling through their quiet streets, but the soldiers weren't theirs. A platoon of Swiss infantry had accidentally invaded their own neighboring country, Liechtenstein. Poor visibility and outdated maps caused them to march nearly 2 kilometers past the border during a night exercise. When they realized their mistake, the commander immediately ordered a retreat, and the troops quietly returned to Swiss soil before sunrise. Liechtenstein, which doesn't even have an army, later confirmed the incursion with a single sentence: "No harm done." The incident became a running joke in both nations, a reminder that even modern militaries can still get lost in the dark. It was the friendliest invasion in history, one that ended not with gunfire but laughter and apologies over coffee between two countries too polite to be angry. Number 43. But military blunders aren't new. In 1788, during the Austro-Turkish War, Austrian General Karl von Khevenhüller ordered his men to advance on what he believed was an Ottoman outpost. It was night, the terrain was chaotic, and his army, composed of soldiers speaking multiple languages, was already confused. In the darkness, one unit mistook another for the enemy, opening fire. Panic spread, and the Austrian army turned its guns on itself. By morning, hundreds were dead, and the Turks hadn't even arrived. The general had, in essence, invaded his own forces. The battle became a humiliating lesson in miscommunication. A war lost not to strategy or numbers, but to the fog of war and the chaos of human error. Number 44. In World War II, American General George S. Patton commanded a secret army that didn't exist. Operation Fortitude was designed to fool the Nazis into thinking the Allies would invade France at Calais instead of Normandy. Patton led an elaborate deception: fake radio traffic, rubber tanks, wooden planes, even inflatable trucks, all arranged to look like a massive invasion force. German reconnaissance photographed the army, and Hitler fell for it completely, diverting troops away from Normandy. On D-Day, while the real forces stormed the beaches, the Phantom Army sat quietly in English fields, manned by actors, artists, and sound engineers. It was one of the most successful hoaxes in military history, an army of ghosts that won a battle without firing a single shot. Number 45. And sometimes, the enemy isn't even there. During Napoleon's 1812 invasion of Russia, General Jean-Baptiste Blaise's exhausted troops were caught in a blizzard near the Berezina River. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and snowdrifts moved like phantoms through the fog. Half mad with cold and fear, soldiers began firing at shadows they thought were enemy cavalry. Muskets cracked, cannons roared, and chaos tore through the ranks as they fought against nothing but wind and white air. When dawn came, they realized they'd spent the night shooting snow. The general ordered a retreat, but morale was shattered. Many froze where they stood, rifles still aimed at invisible foes. The storm had defeated them more thoroughly than any army could. Number 46. Long before satellites or drones, one general tried a far simpler way to see the enemy. He went up. During the French Revolution, General Jean-Marie Coutel and scientist Jean-Baptiste Meunier developed the world's first military observation balloon. In 1794, at the Battle of Fleurus, they floated a hydrogen balloon hundreds of feet into the air, using it to spy on Austrian movements below. Messages were dropped down by weighted cords, guiding French troops in real time. It worked. The French won the battle, marking the first time air reconnaissance changed the outcome of war. Soldiers below stared in awe, watching what looked like a floating moon drift above the smoke. But the victory was short-lived. The balloon's hydrogen was unstable, and later experiments exploded spectacularly. Still, the idea took root. From kites to zeppelins, the dream of seeing the battlefield from the sky had begun, with one fragile balloon drifting through gunfire, turning wind and silk into strategy. Number 47. By World War II, that same idea evolved into one of history's greatest illusions. To mislead the Nazis about the D-Day invasion, the British created a phantom force called the 1st U.S. Army Group. Led on paper by General George S. Patton, it existed only in imagination and rubber. Inflatable tanks, fake aircraft, plywood trucks, and radio chatter convinced German intelligence that the invasion would strike Calais, not Normandy. Even Allied pilots were fooled from above, thinking the rows of dummy vehicles were real. The deception worked perfectly. Hitler held his forces back, expecting an attack that never came. By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. The beaches of Normandy were secured. It was war fought with paint, plastic, and sound, proving that sometimes imagination is the most powerful weapon an army can build. Number 48. But deception took darker forms on the Eastern Front. Desperate to stop advancing German tanks, the Soviet army trained dogs to carry explosives on their backs. The plan was simple. The dogs, conditioned to run under vehicles for food, would charge toward tanks in battle, except now the packs they carried were bombs. When the dog crawled beneath the armor, the detonator would trigger. Thousands were trained, but the chaos of combat confused them. Many turned back toward Soviet lines, exploding among their handlers. The strategy was quietly abandoned after countless failed missions, but the story endured as one of war's most disturbing experiments. Proof that in total desperation, even man's best friend could become a weapon. Number 49. Across the ocean, the United States tried something equally strange: Project X-ray, an attempt to weaponize bats. Scientists discovered that bats could carry tiny incendiary devices, and the idea was to release them over Japanese cities at dawn. The bats would roost in attics and barns, and when the timers ignited, fires would erupt everywhere at once. It was ingenious in theory, but a nightmare in practice. During testing, several bats escaped and set fire to the U.S. Air Base itself. Vehicles burned, hangars collapsed, and the project was canceled before it ever reached the battlefield. The official report simply stated, "Results unpredictable." Number 50. And then there was the Great Emu War of 1932, Australia's most comically doomed campaign. After World War I, returning soldiers were struggling farmers, their crops destroyed by hordes of wild emus. The government sent soldiers armed with machine guns to deal with the problem. But the emus, faster and more agile than expected, scattered the moment the firing began. Bullets flew, but the birds outran trucks, dodged traps, and vanished into the bush. After weeks of futile pursuit, thousands of rounds were spent and only a few dozen birds killed. The soldiers withdrew, defeated by an army of flightless birds. The press dubbed it the Great Emu War, and the birds, large, fast, and completely indifferent, won without even knowing they were in one. Number 51. In the late 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the United States planned something that sounded straight out of science fiction: Project A-119. The goal: detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. The idea wasn't military, but psychological. Scientists feared the Soviet Union's space success after Sputnik had made America look weak, so US officials proposed a lunar demonstration that would light up the night sky and prove American dominance. A team of physicists, including a young Carl Sagan, calculated how visible the explosion would be from Earth. But once they realized how much radioactive dust might rain back into space and how easily the plan could backfire, the project was scrapped. It was a chilling reminder of how close humanity came to turning the moon, a symbol of wonder, into a billboard of fear. The secret stayed buried for decades, proof that sometimes the most dangerous ideas are the ones never tested. Number 52. Yet danger didn't need ambition. Accidents did the job just fine. Between 1950 and 1980, the US suffered dozens of broken arrow incidents, where nuclear weapons were lost or detonated by mistake. One such event happened in 1958, when a B-47 bomber collided with another aircraft near Savannah, Georgia. To avoid crashing, the crew released its hydrogen bomb into the ocean, where it vanished. Another time, in 1961, a bomber over Goldsboro, North Carolina, broke apart mid-air, dropping 2 nuclear bombs, each 250 times more powerful than Hiroshima. One nearly detonated. Only a single safety switch prevented catastrophe. Engineers later said that if it had failed, the eastern seaboard might have been wiped out. These accidents weren't isolated. They were warnings written in near misses, proof that the nuclear age wasn't defined by control, but by the terrifying fragility of human error. Number 53. That 1961 Goldsboro incident remains the most frightening close call in nuclear history. The B-52 bomber was carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs when turbulence tore the plane apart. As it fell, one bomb's parachute deployed, the other plummeted into a muddy field. Recovery teams found the first hanging from a tree, wires dangling, the arming sequence fully engaged. 5 of its 6 safety switches had failed. The last switch, a single low-voltage trigger, was the only thing preventing detonation. If it had gone off, the blast could have destroyed everything from Washington, D.C. to New York. The second bomb buried itself 180 feet underground and was never fully recovered. To this day, pieces of it remain sealed beneath the Carolina soil, guarded by the government and silence alike, a buried time bomb that history has simply chosen to ignore. Number 54. Not every missing weapon stayed on land. In 1968, a U.S. B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed into the icy waters near Thule Air Base in Greenland. 3 bombs were recovered, their plutonium scattered across the ice. But one vanished, lost somewhere in the frozen depths. Despite months of searching with submarines and sonar, it was never found. The Pentagon quietly declared it non-recoverable and closed the case. Locals still whisper that the lost bomb rests beneath the Arctic ice, its radioactive core entombed in permafrost. Scientists warn that melting ice could someday expose the wreck, but no one really knows what's still down there. The official record lists it as missing, an invisible reminder that the Cold War left behind ghosts not just in history, but deep beneath the sea. Number 55. When the nuclear age began, the U.S. wanted to know exactly what atomic war would do to a city, so they built one. In the Nevada desert during the 1950s, scientists constructed miniature towns filled with mannequins, men, women, children, even pets, frozen midlife inside fully furnished homes. They stocked the cupboards, hung curtains, and parked shiny cars outside. Then they detonated bombs nearby and filmed the results. Within seconds, windows shattered, walls vaporized, and the mannequins melted into dust. The footage was later shown to Congress as proof of the bomb's clean efficiency. But behind the sterile science was horror, the silent streets, the eerie stillness after each blast. Those mannequins, forever frozen in that final moment, became haunting symbols of an era obsessed with both progress and annihilation. The towns are gone now, but the test sites remain, still too radioactive to rebuild, a ghostly monument to humanity's experiments with extinction. Number 56. In 1962, deep in Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union conducted one of the most powerful nuclear tests in history, so bright and massive that witnesses swore a second sun had risen over the steppe. It was called Test 219, a 24-megaton explosion detonated high above the atmosphere. The blast illuminated the horizon for hundreds of miles, casting shadows at midnight and turning night into blinding day. Soviet scientists were testing high-altitude radiation effects, but they underestimated the sheer intensity. The fireball expanded into a glowing sphere larger than any city, the sky shimmering with colors as magnetic waves scrambled power grids and radio signals across Asia. For a moment, it looked as if the dawn had come early. Then the light vanished, leaving only silence, and a pulse that circled the planet 3 times. The world never saw that secret sunrise again, but those who witnessed it said it looked like the universe itself had blinked. Number 57. When Cold War tensions pushed science into madness, the Soviets began experimenting with biological weapons, some almost comically grotesque. At one lab in the 1970s, researchers devised a way to turn dead rats into disease delivery systems. The plan was simple: inject the corpses with plague bacteria, freeze them, then drop them behind enemy lines. The rats would thaw, rot, and spread infection among scavengers or anyone who handled them. It was cheap, untraceable, and horrifyingly effective in theory. Fortunately, most tests stayed confined to labs after scientists realized they couldn't control where the pathogens spread. Still, the idea lingered in secret manuals for years, proof that fear in the Cold War wasn't only about bombs and bullets, but about invisible enemies that could fit in the palm of your hand. Number 58. Ironically, Britain had already tried the same idea decades earlier, only their rats exploded. In 1941, British intelligence created explosive rats, taxidermied rodents packed with plastic explosives and disguised to look freshly dead. The plan was to scatter them near German boiler rooms and factories. When janitors or soldiers threw them into furnaces, the heat would trigger the explosives, destroying the machinery. The first shipment was intercepted by the Germans before deployment, but the discovery panicked them so much that they spent months inspecting every dead rat near industrial sites. The psychological disruption alone was considered a success. No factory ever blew up, but entire units were assigned to hunt fake rodents, an entire army outsmarted by stuffed animals. Number 59. Spies soon realized the same trick could hide secrets instead of explosions. During the Cold War, British agents in Moscow used hollowed-out rats to smuggle rolls of microfilm, tiny cameras, and even coded notes. The rodents were left in alleys or thrown out of embassy windows, where another operative could casually retrieve them without suspicion. The dead animal acted as camouflage in plain sight. No one wanted to touch it. Soviet agents eventually caught on and displayed one in a KGB museum, its fur carefully parted to show the hollow cavity inside. It looked ordinary, but inside was proof of espionage at its strangest. A dead rat turned courier, carrying secrets across enemy streets without ever taking a single step. Number 60. But not all animal-based espionage stayed on land. In the 1960s, the CIA ran a project called Operation Acoustic Kitty, training cats to carry listening devices into Soviet embassies. When that failed, other agencies turned to the sea. Fishermen along the Baltic once found gutted fish floating with wires and strange compartments inside. They weren't bombs, they were message containers. Spies used hollowed fish to store documents sealed in waterproof tubes, then tossed them into designated rivers or harbors for retrieval downstream. If intercepted, they looked like nothing more than discarded catch. These tricks blurred the line between science, secrecy, and absurdity. Proof that in the shadow war of intelligence, even death could be repurposed into a tool for silence. Number 61. During World War II, the world of espionage turned everyday objects into instruments of intrigue, sometimes literally. In Nazi-occupied France, one Allied spy used a small music box to send coded messages. Each melody corresponded to a specific pattern of notes representing words and numbers. She'd wind it in cafes or train stations, pretending to enjoy a tune, while resistance members nearby wrote down the sequence. To anyone else, it was just a sentimental song echoing in wartime silence. But to those listening closely, it was intelligence disguised as harmony, orders to move weapons, warn of raids, or relay troop positions. The Nazis never suspected the little music box carried the rhythm of rebellion. After the war, the agent admitted she'd chosen the song not for code efficiency, but because it masked fear. The music gave her steady hands and carried secrets on a melody no one else could hear. Number 62. In Cold War Berlin, a female operative known only as the Whisper smuggled microfilm the size of grains of rice right under the enemy's nose, hidden in her hair. She wore elaborate styles woven with tiny hollow pins coated in wax. Each pin contained a rolled-up message or photographic strip. Border guards routinely searched luggage, but they never dared touch her hair. Once across the checkpoint, she'd melt the wax with a lighter and pull the messages free. Her cover story? A traveling cosmetics consultant. It was perfect. She talked about hairstyles while moving classified intelligence. She reportedly carried plans, passwords, even names of double agents, all hidden within a single bun. The most dangerous secrets of the Cold War fit neatly between strands of hair, turning vanity into survival. Number 63. During the 1950s, American couriers operating in Eastern Europe faced intense scrutiny. Every bag checked, every pen opened. So one agent found a solution hidden in plain sight: lipstick. Engineers at the CIA's Technical Services Division designed a functional lipstick tube with a false bottom, inside which rested a roll of microfilm no wider than a toothpick. The cap twisted normally, even leaving a trace of rouge at the tip to make it look used. Female spies could pass through checkpoints without suspicion, a smile masking state secrets. One agent smuggled blueprints of a Soviet radar facility this way, slipping it past border guards who only saw a cosmetic touch-up. The world imagined espionage as tuxedos and gadgets, but sometimes, all it took to outsmart an empire was a steady hand and a shade of red. Number 64. When a Czech intelligence officer needed to pass stolen documents to the West, he used something as innocent as lunch. Meeting his contact in a Prague park, he handed over a sandwich wrapped in paper, just another worker on a break. Inside the bread, sealed in wax, was a roll of microfilm containing diplomatic codes. If anyone had unwrapped it, they'd see nothing unusual, just salami, cheese, and a smear of mustard. The handoff was quick, undetectable, and over in seconds. Later, in declassified files, the CIA called it Operation Picnic. The microfilm safely reached Washington, hidden in one of the simplest disguises imaginable. In a world of guns and lies, it was a sandwich that carried the truth. Number 65. In 1964, a captured resistance courier in Poland baffled interrogators. They found nothing on him. No documents, no tools, no notes. Yet they knew he carried instructions for sabotage. It wasn't tea until a guard noticed his soap bar felt unusually heavy that they discovered the secret. Inside, beneath a thin layer of wax and soap flakes, lay a hollow core containing a folded sheet of microfilm. He'd carved it out with a spoon and resealed it by hand, so it lathered like any other bar. The message survived baths, searches, and even confiscation before finally being decoded. That single bar of soap carried the location of a hidden Allied supply cache. Years later, the trick became standard spycraft, an everyday object reborn as a vessel for invisible wars. Number 66. During World War II, as Europe collapsed under occupation, resistance networks learned to hide their lifelines in the most ordinary places. One spy in occupied Belgium ran a bakery that became a message hub for Allied intelligence. Inside her elaborate cakes, she concealed microfilm and blueprints for German weapons factories. The papers were baked inside thin layers of sponge, separated by frosting, that kept the ink from smudging. Couriers would collect the cakes as orders for weddings or holidays, delivering them across checkpoints without suspicion. Once safe, the icing was scraped away, revealing hidden diagrams still legible beneath the crumbs. For years, she fooled enemy officers who happily bought her pastries, unaware they were eating around Allied secrets. When the war ended, soldiers remembered her not for her recipes, but for the courage that turned sugar, flour, and icing into a weapon of silent defiance. Number 67. But cakes weren't only for smuggling messages. They were also the key to escape. In 1917, captured French spy Louise de Bettigny was imprisoned by the Germans for organizing intelligence routes through occupied France. Her network refused to let her die behind bars. They sent her gifts: bread, soap, and a small birthday cake. Inside that cake, buried deep in the soft crumb, was a tiny metal file wrapped in cloth. For days she worked by candlelight, slowly cutting through the cell windows' bars. But before she could finish, guards discovered the tampering and transferred her to a tighter cell. The file was confiscated, but the attempt became legend, a symbol of loyalty that crossed prison walls. Years later, captured resistance fighters copied the trick, hiding escape tools and sweets. It was the taste of hope, disguised as dessert. Number 68. 2 decades later, another escape plan would be hidden inside something even more playful: Monopoly. During World War II, British intelligence partnered with the game AS manufacturer to create special editions for Allied prisoners in German camps. To anyone else, they looked like ordinary board games, but beneath the surface lay compasses, maps printed on silk, miniature tools, and real money mixed with the play cash. The boards were marked with subtle dots showing escape routes through France and Scandinavia. When Red Cross shipments delivered the toys, no guard suspected a thing. At least a few hundred prisoners used these kits to break free. After the war, MI9 quietly confirmed their success, crediting a board game with saving lives. It was the perfect disguise: innocent, familiar, and fun, proof that even in the bleakest cells, freedom could start with the roll of a die. Number 69. But not every spy escaped danger. Some walked straight into it. During the Cold War, an East German intelligence officer known as Gabriele Gast was ordered to seduce a West German official for information. She followed the assignment dutifully, gathering secrets and feeding them back to her handlers. But over time, she fell in love with the very man she was meant to betray. Torn between affection and allegiance, she began withholding details, protecting him even as she risked exposure. When the Berlin Wall fell, her double life was revealed. She confessed, saying, "I loved my country, but I loved him more." Her story blurred the border between loyalty and emotion, showing that even in espionage, the heart could become the most unpredictable agent of all. Number 70. In another corner of the Cold War, chess became both sport and subterfuge. Soviet grandmasters traveling abroad were sometimes couriers for coded intelligence, hiding information in chess notation. Moves like knight to e5 or bishop takes f7 corresponded to sequences of numbers or letters. Agents sent messages disguised as casual game updates in newspapers or telegrams. One such correspondence between two players actually outlined the schedule for a secret weapons shipment. The system was nearly unbreakable to outsiders. After all, who would question a nation obsessed with chess? Years later, declassified archives confirmed that entire operations were directed through these games, with pieces and pawns standing in for soldiers and spies. In the Cold War's silent match of wits, the world never realized the board itself was at war. Number 71. Invisible ink was a spy's oldest trick, but during World War I, it wasn't fancy chemicals that saved messages. It was milk. Allied agents discovered that ordinary cow's milk could be used as a simple, effective, invisible ink. A letter would appear perfectly blank until gently heated, revealing faint brown writing beneath the paper's surface. Soldiers wrote between the lines of family letters, hiding troop movements or coded coordinates inside affectionate phrases. British intelligence encouraged the trick because it was cheap, safe, and easy to disguise. But it wasn't foolproof. German censors eventually caught on, sniffing out suspicious letters by holding them over candles. The smell of burning milk became a giveaway. Still, for a time, one of the world's simplest foods outsmarted empires. Every glass on a soldier's breakfast table became a potential weapon, and every mother's letter could carry more than love. It could carry the secrets of war. Number 72. In 1979, the CIA pulled off one of its boldest operations inside the heart of Moscow. An American double agent had stolen rolls of high-resolution film detailing Soviet radar systems, but there was no way to smuggle them past KGB searches. Enter a pair of custom-made Oxford shoes. CIA engineers hollowed out the heel, creating a tiny chamber lined with foil to protect the film from body heat and pressure. The agent slipped the reels inside and walked straight through security, coolly handing the shoes off to an embassy courier. Once back in Washington, analysts developed the film that revealed massive gaps in Soviet air defenses. It was a quiet victory that came down not to guns or gadgets, but one man's steady stride. To the world, he was just another diplomat in polished shoes. To the CIA, he was a hero who walked the line between exposure and legend. Number 73. Then there was Operation Acoustic Kitty, perhaps the strangest experiment in espionage history. In the 1960s, the CIA decided to turn a cat into a living listening device. Surgeons implanted a tiny microphone in its ear, a transmitter near its skull, and a wire along its spine. The idea was to release the cat near Soviet embassies where it could eavesdrop unnoticed. The first test, however, was a disaster. Moments after release, the cat wandered into the street and was struck by a taxi. Millions of dollars and years of research ended instantly. The project was quietly canceled, its failure buried in classified files. Later documents confirmed the CIA truly believed they could train a cat to spy for America. It became an infamous symbol of Cold War absurdity, proof that in the pursuit of secrets, no idea was too ridiculous to try once. Number 74. In 1968, an American submarine named USS Scorpion mysteriously disappeared in the Atlantic with 99 crewmen aboard. Officially, it was declared lost due to unknown mechanical failure. Unofficially, it carried sensitive surveillance gear and a trove of coded communications, secrets the Navy feared could fall into Soviet hands. For months, both nations raced to find the wreck. The Soviets searched covertly, while the US used top-secret acoustic data to triangulate the final moments. When it was finally discovered 10,000 feet below the surface, the hull was twisted, the cause still uncertain. Conspiracy theories spread. Some said it was torpedo malfunction, others claimed sabotage. The wreck remains on the ocean floor, sealed off by secrecy. The men aboard were never recovered, and the Scorpion became both a grave and a vault, a silent capsule of the Cold War resting in eternal darkness. Number 75. In 1970s Eastern Europe, the secret police didn't need spies in every room. They simply turned the rooms themselves into spies. At the Hotel Viru in Soviet-controlled Estonia, KGB engineers bugged every floor. Microphones hid behind mirrors, in ashtrays, even inside the chandeliers. Each sound was routed to a secret 23rd floor, one that didn't appear on the elevators, where agents listened and recorded the guests' every move. Western journalists, businessmen, and suspected defectors were all monitored in their sleep. Even the hotel phones were traps. Every word passed through a recording switchboard before ringing the room. When Estonia gained independence, the hidden floor was finally opened. Inside, time had frozen, dusty tape machines still humming with echoes of decades-old whispers. The hotel still stands today, part museum, part warning. In the age of surveillance, even the walls can have ears. Number 76. In the divided city of Berlin, beneath the concrete and barbed wire, freedom ran underground. In 1962, a group of West German students began digging a secret tunnel beneath the Berlin Wall. They started from an abandoned bakery cellar, shoveling dirt by hand. carrying it out in buckets disguised as flour bags. The passage stretched over 400 feet, just wide enough to crawl through, its air thick with dust and fear. They dug for months, using homemade ventilation pipes and lamps wired from stolen batteries. When the tunnel finally broke through into East Berlin, they guided 29 people, men, women, even children, through the narrow space to the west. Soldiers patrolled just yards above, unaware that liberty passed right beneath their boots. Many of the diggers were barely 20 years old, risking their lives for strangers. Years later, one of them said the sound of each person emerging from the hole, gasping at their first breath of free air, was worth every scoop of earth. Number 77. In 1962, prisoner Frank Freshwaters was serving time in Ohio for manslaughter when he simply walked out of the gate. Unlike the violent breakouts Hollywood imagined, his escape was quiet and patient. Assigned to a low-security honor farm, he earned the guards' trust, then vanished one night, leaving only an empty bunk. For decades, he lived under a false name, working odd jobs, paying taxes, blending in as a model citizen. His story inspired part of the myth behind the Shawshank Redemption, a man who escaped not through violence, but by outliving his punishment. When U.S. Marshals finally found him in 2015, now in his 80s, they described him as gentle and polite. The world had changed around him, but he still smiled at his freedom, saying softly, "I always figured they'd find me someday." Number 78. In 2014, a Turkish inmate named Michael Vojur escaped from a high-security prison using nothing more than a spoon. For years, he chipped away at the cement wall behind his cell, working at night and hiding the dust in his mattress. When the hole was large enough, he climbed through into a service tunnel, then scaled to the roof where his wife awaited in a stolen helicopter. The plan was so audacious it seemed fictional, yet it worked. They flew off into the clouds before guards even realized he was gone. The escape lasted only months before capture, but the spoon that freed him became a symbol across Europe, a reminder that even behind walls of concrete and steel, patience can carve a way out one scrape at a time. Number 79. In 1943, during World War II, a group of Allied prisoners held in Stalag Luft III, later made famous by the Great Escape, used soup cans as tools of liberation. They flattened the cans into shovels, fashioned supports for the tunnel walls, and even built air pumps to keep oxygen flowing underground. Each tunnel was disguised beneath a stove or table, leading dozens of men toward freedom. They called them Tom, Dick, and Harry. Though most were recaptured, the ingenuity stunned their captors. Every can had been recycled from their rations, proof that persistence could turn scraps into salvation. Years later, surviving POWs said the real victory wasn't escaping, but proving that the human spirit could outdig despair itself. Number 80. But not every prison inspired escape. In Norway, there's a place called Bastøy Prison, an island facility unlike any in the world. Surrounded by calm seas and pine forests, it houses murderers and thieves who live in wooden cottages, tend animals, and study in open-air classrooms. There are no bars on the windows, no armed guards patrolling the grounds. The rule is simple: respect the community, and the community will respect you. Remarkably, nearly no one tries to flee. Inmates cook together, work on farms, and earn real wages, rebuilding their lives long before their release. Officials call it rehabilitation through humanity, and statistics back it up. Bastøy's reoffense rate is among the lowest on Earth. It's the prison no one wants to escape from because for many inside, it's the first place they've ever felt free. Number 81. In 1960, construction crews in Ontario began building what was supposed to be a state-of-the-art correctional facility, designed for high security, maximum isolation, and perfect efficiency. But halfway through the project, someone realized a fatal mistake. The entire blueprint had been read backward. The blueprints were mirrored during printing, so doors opened outward instead of inward. Security checkpoints faced the wrong direction, and watchtowers overlooked parking lots instead of the yard. The prison, officially called the Kemptville Correctional Complex, became known as the Backwards Jail. It cost millions to fix, but many design flaws stayed. Cells that locked from the wrong side, hallways too narrow for patrols, and guard stations with no visibility. Inmates joked they could walk backward to freedom. The fiasco became a legend in Canadian architecture, a monument to human error in a place built to contain it. In the end, the government quietly decommissioned part of the site, turning the failure into offices. Number 82. In Milan, Italy, there is a prison where the clang of steel bars is replaced by the sound of clinking wine glasses. It is called In Galera, Latin for in prison, and it is a fully functioning gourmet restaurant run entirely by inmates. Inside the Bolate Correctional Facility, prisoners work as chefs, servers, and hosts, cooking five-star meals for guests from the outside world. The menu changes seasonally, featuring dishes like saffron risotto and tiramisu, each plate a lesson in discipline and trust. Diners are checked in by guards but quickly forget they're inside a prison. The program began as a rehabilitation experiment, teaching inmates responsibility, teamwork, and pride through hospitality. It worked. Recidivism rates dropped dramatically among participants, and several former inmates went on to become professional chefs. In Galera flipped the meaning of doing time into serving time, and literally, proving that second chances can be plated, seasoned, and served to anyone willing to believe in redemption. Number 83. In 2012, authorities in Argentina discovered that one of their prisons no longer had any walls. The local government had run out of funding mid-renovation and ordered construction crews to remove the crumbling perimeter for safety reasons, then never rebuilt it. For months, inmates lived in what was essentially an open-air camp. There were guards, yes, but no barriers between them and the surrounding countryside. Everyone expected chaos. Instead, most prisoners stayed. Many had families nearby, jobs waiting or parole soon approaching. They feared escape would destroy their futures. A few did wander off, but most returned voluntarily. Locals joked that the prison had become a suggestion, not a command. Eventually, new walls were funded and built, but something strange lingered in the air. The experiment had shown that confinement wasn't always about concrete and wire. It was about conscience. Number 84. In 2014, Michael Vaujour made headlines as the French convict who escaped using a helicopter. But his breakout began long before that, with a spoon. Locked in La Sante prison, he spent years scraping at the cement wall behind his cell with a single utensil stolen from the cafeteria. Each night he chipped away grain by grain, using toothpaste to hide the marks and storing the dust inside hollowed-out books. When the opening was large enough, he crawled through into a maintenance shaft, then climbed to the roof, where his wife, trained to fly a stolen helicopter, hovered above. Guards stared in disbelief as he vanished into the sky. He was recaptured months later, but his escape became legend. Number 85. In 1854, during a cholera outbreak in London, thousands were dying, and no one knew why. Doctors blamed the air, the weather, even divine punishment. But a humble physician named John Snow thought differently. Armed with nothing more than a notebook and a silver spoon, he began collecting water samples from every pump in the city. He noticed one well on Broad Street connected to every major cluster of deaths. Using the spoon, he drew a final sample, thick, foul-smelling, crawling with bacteria under his microscope. He removed the pump handle himself, stopping the outbreak almost overnight. Snow had discovered that cholera spread through contaminated water, not bad air. His simple spoonful of evidence became one of the greatest breakthroughs in medical history, laying the foundation for modern epidemiology. Number 86. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1600s, few dared to approach the sick, but one man did, and in doing so, he accidentally invented the first version of modern protective gear. Charles Delorme, physician to the French royal court, designed a bizarre outfit to shield himself from infection. He wore a long waxed coat made of leather, gloves, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. But his most famous feature was the mask. A long, curved beak stuffed with herbs and flowers meant to purify the air. He believed disease spread through bad smells, not germs. But his invention worked by accident. The waxed fabric repelled fluids, and the mask reduced exposure to droplets. Though the science was wrong, the design saved lives and became the grim face of the plague doctor. 4 centuries later, his eerie silhouette would inspire the concept of PPE, proof that sometimes superstition leads, by accident, to science. Number 87. In 1666, London was suffocating from another outbreak of plague. Houses were sealed, streets silent, and bodies stacked in the alleys. But one night in a baker's shop on Pudding Lane, a single spark escaped the oven and ignited the wooden walls. The fire spread fast, consuming building after building until the entire city was ablaze. For 5 days, London burned, and when the flames finally died, something unexpected happened. The plague vanished. The fire had destroyed the cramped, rat-infested neighborhoods that had fueled the epidemic, burning away the fleas and the filth that carried it. What began as an accident became salvation through devastation. The baker whose oven started it, Thomas Fariner, lived in shame for years, never realizing his mistake had purified a city dying from within. The Great Fire of London took thousands of homes, but it also burned the last breath of the Black Death from its streets. Number 88. When desperation met ignorance, medicine often turned deadly. During the 17th century, one miracle cure for the plague became infamous: gunpowder mixed with vinegar and herbs. Apothecaries swore it could cleanse the body by explosive detoxification. Patients drank it or rubbed it onto swollen plague boils, believing the blast of heat and sulfur would drive out disease. Instead, the mixture of charcoal, saltpeter, and sulfur reacted violently. Records describe victims bursting into flames or suffering internal ruptures when the mixture ignited near open fires. It was a horror disguised as hope. Yet, even in failure, it showed how far people would go to fight the invisible enemy of their age, burning themselves alive in search of life. The so-called cure faded quickly, but its memory remained, a reminder that in medicine, faith without understanding can be as dangerous as the plague itself. Number 89. In Renaissance Italy, when plague emptied cities and prayers failed, one physician believed salvation might be found in sound. Dr. Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar and early microbiologist, theorized that harmonious vibrations could cleanse the poisoned air that carried disease. He filled his patients' rooms with violins, flutes, and organs, insisting that music could restore the body's natural rhythm. Musicians were paid to perform beside hospital beds as the sick coughed and bled. Some claimed to feel calmer, others simply stopped suffering for a while. Kircher didn't cure the plague, but his strange experiment marked the first recorded attempt at music therapy. In the echo of those desperate melodies, modern doctors found a truth he could only guess at: that sound, though it couldn't kill germs, could still heal something deeper: the will to live. Number 90. Medicine in ancient Egypt was as creative as it was terrifying. Around 1500 BCE, physicians believed that good health depended on keeping the body's internal channels clear, much like the Nile's flow. Their treatments mixed magic with nature, and sometimes pure absurdity. One common prescription for infections, birth control, and stomach pain was crocodile dung. Dried, ground, and blended with honey or oil, it was packed into wounds or inserted as a cleansing agent. The logic was symbolic, using the power of a fierce animal to ward off illness. But in reality, it introduced dangerous bacteria that made patients sicker. Yet those early healers weren't fools. They were pioneers experimenting with what they had. Their mistakes, preserved on papyrus scrolls, became the roots of medical progress. Every absurd remedy, from dung to leeches, was a step on the long, messy path to understanding the human body. Number 91. In the 1600s, when melancholy was considered a disease of the soul, one London physician prescribed something radical for despair: chocolate. Dr. Henry Stubbe, fascinated by the new import from the Americas, believed its rich flavor and warming nature could revive the spirits and calm the passions. He wrote entire treatises praising cocoa as a cure for sadness, fatigue, and what he called the miseries of the heart. At the time, medicine meant bloodletting and mercury, so the idea of treating sorrow with sweetness was revolutionary. Aristocrats began sipping medicinal chocolate in silver cups, claiming it soothed their nerves and sharpened their minds. Stubbe may not have understood serotonin or dopamine, but his intuition was right. Chocolate's natural compounds do elevate mood. 4 centuries later, doctors wouldn't prescribe it formally, but the world still reaches for it when life feels heavy. In a sense, Stubb's strange idea never faded, it just became dessert therapy. Number 92. In 19th century France, leeches were the fashion accessory of medicine, and sometimes literally fashion. Dr. Francois Broussais, a celebrated physician, championed leech therapy for nearly every ailment, from fevers to heartbreak. His followers took the craze to extremes, keeping live leeches in glass vials or decorative hairpins, ready for use. Women of Paris's elite were rumored to wear jeweled clips hiding small leeches, pressed behind the ears to improve complexion and balance the blood. Hospitals ordered millions each year, stripping entire swamps bare. Broussais sincerely believed illness came from excess vitality, not weakness, so bleeding was his cure. Patients fainted, infections spread, and critics mocked the trend as elegant self-destruction. Yet behind the absurdity was an early understanding of circulation and detoxification, a grotesque prelude to modern medicine's obsession with cleansing. By the time the fad died, Europe had literally bled itself thin for beauty and belief. Number 93. Before modern anesthesia, pain was part of surgery, until whiskey filled the gap. In the 1800s American frontier, doctors had little to dull agony except what they could pour. Patients were told to drink until they blacked out. Surgeons followed suit to steady their nerves. In makeshift hospitals during the Civil War, whiskey became both disinfectant and anesthetic. Soldiers clutched tin cups as saws bit through bone, screaming through drunken fog. One Confederate doctor recorded that his best surgeries were done with half a bottle. It was brutal but effective. Alcohol slowed the heart, blurred pain, and bought minutes of unconsciousness. Eventually, ether and chloroform replaced it, but the image of the whiskey surgeon endured. A man in blood-soaked sleeves, operating by lamplight, bottle in hand. In a world without morphine or mercy, whiskey was medicine, and for many, the last comfort before darkness. Number 94. Robert Liston was known as the fastest knife in London. In an age before anesthesia, speed meant survival, but in 1847 his precision failed him spectacularly. During an amputation, he swung his scalpel so quickly that he sliced not only the patient's leg, but also his assistant's fingers, and tore the coat of an onlooker, who reportedly died of shock. Both the patient and assistant later died from infection. 3 deaths in one operation. Months later, Liston himself nicked his hand while dissecting a corpse and died from gangrene, the same fate he'd inflicted on countless others. His name became synonymous with the dangers of haste in medicine. Yet in his tragedy lay progress. His career helped push for antiseptics and anesthesia, innovations that ended the era of speed as salvation. He had once raced death, and in the end, death simply moved faster. Number 95. Centuries earlier, in Japan's Sengoku period, one battlefield surgeon took the phrase cutting-edge medicine literally. Known only as Hiraga Genai, he performed emergency amputations and cauterizations using a samurai sword. During one siege, when his tools were lost in the chaos, he unsheathed his blade, sterilized it in boiling oil, and began operating under fire. Witnesses said he moved like a warrior, precise, unflinching, his sword slicing through mangled limbs to save lives. The weapon of death became an instrument of mercy. Though his methods were brutal, his results were astonishingly effective for the time. Genai's blend of combat and care symbolized an era when the line between doctor and soldier blurred completely. His sword, now displayed in a Kyoto museum, bears an inscription said to be his own. The same edge that destroys can also preserve. It was medicine forged in battle, bloody, fearless, and unforgettable. Number 96. In medieval Europe, a visit to the dentist was a test of faith and pain tolerance. Anesthetics didn't exist, so when teeth rotted or abscessed, the only relief was removal, often in a public square. But one Italian barber surgeon in the 13th century found a way to ease the agony. Strong red wine. He'd pour it into a cup, have the patient drink deeply, then rinse and hold it in the mouth until numbness set in. The alcohol dulled pain and sterilized the wound, at least briefly. As he pulled the tooth with iron pliers, assistants held the patient steady, while the crowd cheered or winced. It was crude, but for many it was the first true anesthetic they'd ever know. Later, doctors mixed wine with opium or herbs, calling it soporific sponge, the ancestor of modern anesthesia. In a world ruled by blood and prayer, one simple drink became medicine, the taste of mercy in a goblet of pain. Number 97. In the dark halls of medieval Europe's prisons stood one of its cruelest inventions, the iron chair. At first glance it looked like a throne, but up close its seat, back, and armrests were covered in hundreds of steel spikes. Victims were stripped and placed upon it, their bodies pierced as leather straps tightened across their limbs. Some versions were even heated from below, cooking the flesh as screams echoed off stone walls. Officials called it the question chair, believing pain would force confession. In truth, few survived long enough to speak. The cruel irony was its shape, arms open, almost embracing, as if offering comfort. Historians later called it the hug of death, a chilling symbol of justice twisted into torture. Today, surviving chairs sit in museums, silent but still menacing, reminders that even civilization's furniture once had fangs. Number 98. Among the most nightmarish devices of the Middle Ages was one that blended cruelty with art, the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg. Built to resemble a human figure, its hollow interior hid sharp metal spikes. When the victim was shut inside, the doors pierced them slowly, drawing out death over hours. Yet what made this version infamous was its music. Early chroniclers claimed that gears and pipes attached to the frame played haunting notes as the mechanism closed. An eerie melody meant to mask the screams. The sound echoed through dungeons like a twisted lullaby, earning it the name, the Singing Coffin. Whether myth or truth, it embodied medieval belief that punishment could be both spectacle and ritual. Even centuries later, the idea of dying to music, your final breath harmonizing with horror, remains one of history's darkest compositions. Number 99. In 1325, the small Italian cities of Modena and Bologna accidentally stumbled into one of the strangest wars ever fought, over a bucket. It began when a group of Modenese soldiers stole a wooden pail from Bologna's well as a joke. The insult infuriated Bologna's leaders, who mobilized 30,000 troops to retrieve it. Modena answered with 7,000. Neither side truly wanted war, but pride demanded it. The armies clashed in a single chaotic battle at Zappolino, where thousands died, all for the honor of a stolen bucket. Modena won and kept the pail, displaying it as a trophy in their city hall. Historians later called it the most pointless war in medieval history, proof that nations can kill for symbols while forgetting what they ever meant. The bucket still exists today, dusty behind glass, an artifact of pride, absurdity, and the cost of laughter turned lethal. Number 100. Sir James Douglas, known as the Black Douglas, was one of Scotland's fiercest knights during the Wars of Independence. Yet he was also known for something unheard of, charging into battle without armor. He claimed the weight slowed him, and that speed and surprise were his best defense. Wrapped only in black tunics and carrying twin swords, he led raids that terrified English forces. His enemies called him a ghost, believing no blade could touch him. In truth, Douglas relied on chaos, striking fast, retreating faster. He fought and died unarmored, his courage both admired and questioned. To his men it was proof of bravery, to his foes, madness. But history remembered him for one thing above all. When others trusted steel, he trusted himself. His legend still whispers across the moors, a man who walked into war unshielded, daring fate to strike first.